Hello, everyone. You are listening to Kingdom Stories, where we tell stories of hope and power from the lives of everyday Christians just like you and me. It's my hope that these stories encourage you in your walk with the Lord and remind you weekly about how awesome our God is. Hey, everybody. I'm here with my brother, Peter Olson. He's a good friend of mine, good brother from church.
How's it going?
Hey, Peter, you want to go ahead and start telling folks your story?
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for having me on. I love sharing my story. It's like a really good reminder to me, as well as like what God has done in my life, and like really kind of affirms your faith to go back and remember. Just as the Israelites are always thinking about, okay, what did God do for us again? This is kind of my version of that. So I have to go and start with the stereotypical. I grew up in a Christian home, and I really thought my testimony was going to be boring, right?
Right.
Back when I was a kid, I remember thinking like, yeah, I feel like nothing's really happened in my life. And, people talked about this before. I believed in the things of the Bible, but I didn't realize at the time that my like identity as a person was, somewhere else, way somewhere
Hmm.
else. And a lot of kids are in that spot growing up, you're like, I can reasonably accept these things that my parents are telling me. It's easier to do when you grow up going to Sunday school and stuff. But almost always you go to school and you start thinking about things like different things, like thinking about friends, and you're thinking about grades, and you're thinking about college all of a sudden, right? And you're getting all these different influences in your life that's
Mm-hmm.
telling you and pulling you in a different direction. So when I was like a freshman in high school was when things started kind of cooking up, and I was going to youth group and stuff, and I was involved, but I was also starting to get really pulled into school and pulled into friend groups and pulled into popularity. I mean, I got a girlfriend my freshman year, and I was like, think about that now. Way too young. Don't do that. But my parents were just highly, highly focused on me doing well in school, primarily. And it became a really big stressor for me. And I was like thinking about all the time, like, oh man, I just need the right friend group, and I need to like, have this like, it's really important, like for me that like this relationship goes well, even though I was so young. It was like really important, and the grades, and it was a lot at once. And it was about my sophomore year actually, when everything started going downhill. My friend groups was like just non-existent. The relationship, if you want to call it, with the girlfriend sucked. It was terrible. The grades started getting bad, and that caused a lot of like pressure at home, like a lot of pressure. I remember going home, and really the only thing my parents had talked to me about was how was school? Like, how are you doing? Like, do you have any homework? Like, did you fix this? That was the only thing we talked about pretty much every day for
Wow.
months. I didn't really realize it either. It became very normalized, but it really had a big effect on me. I was staying up pretty late each night to 1 or 2 in the morning, and getting up at 6 because I had class at 7 a.m. and doing this day after day after day, and it just had a huge toll. And I started getting like really depressed because like I was putting in all these hours and I was trying, but I was failing at all of them. All these things that I thought were really important were not measuring up like at all. It was kind of
Mm.
pulling me in the opposite direction. And I started spiraling really in that depression and in that mental state. And it came down to at night where I was suicidal to that point. And like it felt like at that time that I just had no other option really. And I had run away from home at that night. It wasn't really like running away, like I'm just gonna like go somewhere else. It really was to go out and like try and kill myself. Like
Wow.
I made a plan to get out and just end it. So I was walking along a road, like going to a like specific place I had in mind along the road, and I was just super upset. I was crying out, like literally crying, and like yelling out and like yelling at God. Like my relationship with God was like, pretty subpar. But it was like there, and I didn't get it. I'm like, why? There's a lot of
Mm.
whys. Why this? Why that? Why that? Like, because I was trying so hard and failing. And, he didn't say anything to me when I was crying out. But when I got to like where I was going to go, I was literally just planning on jumping in front of a car. It was that bad. When I was crying out to God, and I was either looking up or looking down, and I looked forward, and I saw what I can only best describe as a vision of an angel. Not like, maybe it was a physical angel, but it was in the middle of the road. It was standing up, and it was kind of this shimmery figure, and it had a sword. Um,
Wow.
that was this glowing kind of shimmering sword, kind of this white color. It's a very strange image to try and describe. It was also a long time ago, so I'm going to leave it up to your imagination. But the thing I most took away from it was it was very intimidating, and I knew immediately that I couldn't continue going where I was going. He was
Wow.
blocking the path. I think that was what that was the goal. If I had to guess what God was doing, is to physically block me. And I kind of came to a dead end, so to speak. And I just sat down next to the sidewalk and just I cried there for a long time. It was a very much a bottom, so to speak. I went eventually just walked back home, and there was a lot of mess to sort through. I had to explain to my parents what was up. And the crazy thing is like things didn't get better immediately. There was no like spiritual like revelation in that moment. It was only like a revelation that like what I was doing was not working. And that climb out of depression took time. I think God definitely helped with that. But what he was really hammering into me was my identity, that my identity in those things was really, really poorly insufficient. And it was the first, not my first houseboat trip, but it was a houseboat trip. Houseboats is a summer camp. It's a Christian summer camp that they bring out youth groups, and they have all the students live on a houseboat. It's like a big boat with a kitchen and a living area and stuff. You sleep on the roof, and you live on there for a week, and you do all sorts of crazy games and get pulled behind a ski boat and all sorts of stuff like that. So it's a lot of fun. But during one of those trips, directly after that in the summer, there was a guy who was one of the camp counselors. And I remember him like coming up to me at the beginning of the week. Never met him before. His name was Tony. And Tony just started asking me all these questions. Like,
Hmm.
what's your favorite candy? What do you like to do? What's your favorite sport? What grade are you in? What kind of math do you like? And he just like kept on asking questions. I'm like, why? I just didn't get it. Right. It was actually kind of a culture shock to me, because I was so used to like the only questions being asked me is about school. And this person like had a genuine interest in me and like things about me. And it was huge for me. It was absolutely huge, because really it was God pursuing me through Tony. It was God showing that he cares about me. And I was experiencing the love of God through Tony. And I didn't realize it at the time, but it brought me closer to God in that moment. And just, he was softening my heart during that trip and telling me and about my identity. The theme about that from that summer was about identity. I think it was Romans 12, 1-2. That's the verse is about being transformed through the renewing of your mind. Yeah, that was really huge. And from that trip, and also the one after it the next year, I was really learning like that my identity can't be in things in the world. If I put my identity and like my value in school, I'm going to fail. I'm going to suck. Or it's just not going to be satisfying, which I've learned later in life. You get one of the two. Like I learned to really like what it really meant to pursue my faith as my own. It might have been the following year, the same houseboats trip, where I was just, God just kept teaching me, and I started turning over my heart to God rather than making the things that made me be school, was probably the primary one, or friend groups or girlfriends or whatever. It was my junior, senior year where I really started like pursuing a faith on my own. It had always been my parents' thing, kind of leading it forward. And it came to a time in high school where I started doing it on my own. I started my own Bible studies in high school, because I'm like, well, shoot, if this is gonna be my own, what things am I doing on my own volition, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm kind of stuck at home, but like I can make things happen, right? And I was encouraged at that time from a youth pastor, like, hey, you're going to go to college and you're going to suddenly come to this conclusion, one way or another, that yeah, you kind of do everything on your own volition now. So what are you going to do about it? Which most kids don't fully understand, right? But he really
Yeah.
encouraged us to have a plan, and somehow I had enough brain cells to listen to that plan and really prepare myself for college and decide, like, early on. I decided before I went to college I was never going to drink alcohol or do drugs. Still never have done either. That was like a good start, right? I
Yeah.
decided early on I was going to find a church like ASAP and go to crew, which I did. It was actually really hard to find a church right away going into college. Like, I thought, oh, you just kind of go around, but I didn't have a car, right? You got to make
Oh.
friends, and then you got to be really proactive. And I didn't realize how hard it's gonna be. So it was actually the first in my life. I hadn't been to church in like 2 months before I like started going, because like I had to find people that are also motivated.
Yeah.
Take some time, but I did, and I'm really glad that, like, going into that, I had that mentality, or it could have easily slipped off into whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So the first part of like my story is like God kind of dragging me through the trenches, and then teaching me about like my identity in Christ, that I'm a new creation in Christ, that my citizenship is in heaven, that I have to transform my mind not from things of this world to the things of God, and I really had to get God's help in doing that. And I'm glad that He did. I'm glad that He disciplined me. Kind of the second part of my journey is kind of college onward, right? The kind of the sweet and sour thing about kind of how God disciplines us and God teaches us is that we should in our lives have multiple testimonies. Our testimony is just like how God is like changing us, or in this case, like bringing you to Christ. But I like to think of like everything that God is doing in my life is just little different testimonies about what God is doing.
Yeah.
So the hope is in that God is still using things in your life and kind of stirring the cooking pot a little, to teach you and grow you more like Christ, be more like Him. The second half of my testimony is about faith, right? If my identity is in Christ, that's great, but am I going to endure, the trials of life?
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's, the parable of the farmer sowing seed, right? There's a seed that lands on the path, and that's not going to survive. And then there's the thorns, right? The thorns, I think, is related to faith. I don't have it in front of me, so we'll see how that holds up. But the thorns, came in college. How am I going to continue pursuing God when things go south? There's kind of two major things that happened for me. One was that during my freshman year, there was this one friend I had who had worked at that same summer camp, and we happened to overlap when I was like a super senior and she was also the same age, and we both ended up going to our college, Cal Poly. And we met in college and friends, and she was like, "Hey, you should apply to that summer camp with me." And I had a great experience, with that summer camp, the Houseboats Camp Sunshine. When she asked me if I wanted to join her summer camp, I was like, no, no, absolutely not. And she's like, what? And then she was persistent, thankfully. And she's like, hey, do you want to join me and work at summer camp? Come on. And I'm like, no. And she kept asking for months. And I kept saying no for months. And
Wow.
eventually on the ninth or 10th ask, and I was just like, oh, fine. I can look back now and see that God was really softening a tough heart. I was saying no actually because out of fear. The whole idea of working at a boat camp on the water was not the greatest hit for me. I was not a good swimmer, if
Mm.
swimming at all. That was actually like a huge fear of mine. Just fear of open water. Like when I was a camper, so to speak, I almost never went in the water.
Wow.
Pretty much never. I was always inside playing cards. I was kind of avoiding that. But also, like my cooking experience, you're like first year you're on serving. You're usually a cook. Was like, I've cooked frozen pizza and cereal. That's about it. But and you have to cook for the whole, youth group, or whatever group is coming on, as your first kind of time on staff. And I'm like, this is not the camp for me. And it's just funny that God is like, you know what? I'm going to use that. Oh, is this? It's First Corinthians 4:15-16, which says, "But God uses the lowly things of this world and the despised things of this world and the things that are not to nullify the things that are, so that no one may boast before Him." And I was certainly in that position where didn't really feel well equipped, but God was going to use me anyway. And I have now served with that camp well, in some capacity, I've served with that camp for about 8 years now. And it's just been like a huge, huge way that God has grown me in spiritual leadership and my faith, my relationship with God, and just like my fruit, like the fruit of the Spirit, like the Holy Spirit is working through my life, and keeping me focused on Him and in service and like teaching people about Jesus. I've led trips through that camp now. I've done all sorts of things because of that camp, and God's really just grown me in faith.
So you said that God used your hardness of heart.
Uh-huh.
So did you have more detail on that? Like he used that as a bonus. Like how did God use that?
With the not wanting to work at the camp,
Mm-hmm.
like it took me like going to that camp and like having a lot of fear, but trusting in God, even though like that was present, and saying, you know what, these are things that I need your help with. It taught me to really like lean on God when I didn't have the strength.
Was
The
this
whole
fear of
hardness,
failure or?
fear of dying, the fear of failure, sure, with cooking stuff. The water part was pretty much literally a physical fear.
Wow.
Yeah, a lot of the people that work at the camp are kind of like lifeguards, basically human fish. And I was afraid that they're going to ask me, so tell us about like how many years you've been lifeguarding and on the swim team. And I'm like, I use arm floaties. Is that the right answer? Tell us about how many life-saving experiences you've had. And they don't ask you that. They have an awesome track record with just God taking care of the students. They've been a camp for 45 years.
Wow.
And counting. Never had a student die or be seriously injured. That injuries that don't recover, that is certainly injuries, but yeah, it's just like so evident, and I've tons of stories, although not the time for that, of just God just miraculously saving. And it's just through prayer, it's just through trusting the Lord, and really teaches students at that camp spiritual leadership. But anyways, I'm getting off track. Is that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, that's like kind of like the first kind of part about faith. I think I'll skip over to the second part of like really like choosing God even when like everything goes downhill. The second part was I was in a relationship in college for most of my college years, a more serious one that lasted 3 something years. And there came a point where I was going the wrong direction, both like in my sin and both in the relationship, where I completely like kind of lost track of like the intentionality of like, hey, you and me are in this together. Like, what are we chasing after together? Right. That mentality was lost, and it was hard to see that. But eventually it brought us to a pretty bad place, both in the relationship and in everyday life, where we were graduating and we had to decide, hey, what are we gonna do? She wanted to go to grad school in Washington. I felt like the Lord was calling me to stay in the Bay Area very strongly. I was trying to get her to pray about it. She wasn't doing it. And I eventually just went with her right up to Washington. And I felt like the Lord was like, I felt like Jonah. I felt immediately like
Wow.
Jonah. And eventually, months down the road, it all fell apart. We broke up, just very painfully, very, very painfully. And I was very much isolated and like kind of left like with just nothing. And then, a lot of people, I think in my situation, like have a choice. Like, are you going to like yell at God, like, and say, I forgot to mention that we were also engaged.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. missing details here. Yeah, so it was very serious, and yet we still like came to that point, and so it was more than just losing a relationship. It was like, yeah, I lost something like really big, and you have like an option there. Like, are you gonna like say like Job or like or Job's friends, that is, curse God and die?
Right.
That's kind of the mental place that you're in at that point. Or are you gonna like say, you know what, like throughout all of this sucks, but you are still like my God, and I'm gonna like trust you, and I know that you're gonna pick me up throughout all this. And that was just a huge defining moment in my life where like I had to shake off something really big and trust God even through the thick of it. It took a lot of recovery even from that, but like that's what I ended up doing. Came back here. Probably met you shortly after that, actually. Eventually, God called me back to Creekside. It was hard for me to come back to Creekside because people knew I was like engaged, like most people did, and I was afraid to even come back and like talk to people.
Wow.
It was that difficult, just fear of that, people asking. But God led me back, and I was able to listen to Him and like learn like some really important lessons there. And since then, it's I'm sure God has more trials for me. God is going to teach me new things, but I've just been chasing after Jesus every day since. And yeah, that's my big journey.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
I find it interesting, different people's unique stories, and hearing your story. Not many folks see an angel. That's a big one right there. But I gotta say, like, I'm not big on water either, and you're not getting me on a boat. Like,
right.
Man, it would have to take like a letter direct written by the hand of God saying, "Hey, get on that boat."
Yeah.
Like actually dealing with the kids, that's a different issue. But the water, I like the arm floaty idea. Let's,
Right.
But yeah, I can see how that would definitely take some trust that He's in control.
Yeah, it's huge. I think for a lot of people, me included, when we want to serve and do something, we want to do it in a place that's safe and comfortable. And if it's not one of those, you're like, it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Now, if God calls you to a place that is not safe and not comfortable, what are you going to do in that moment? Because he might,
Yeah.
maybe he will. Like, there's nothing wrong with like serving the Lord, and around here and or in an easy place or whatever. But
even reaching out to your neighbors in this COVID situation, even that's going outside of the safe zone of your home.
Right.
Are you going to step out in boldness, or are you going to cower in fear? And it's like we don't want to violate the quarantine, but at the same time, there's things that people need. People need food. People need toilet paper for some reason.
Some reason, yeah.
And you got to get outside the comfort zone to do that.
Right.
And so, I love the idea. This kind of ties into being the hands and feet of Jesus in a place that's uncomfortable, and trusting Him to take care of you. And I really like that about your story.
Thank you.
I think it's interesting seeing different people's testimonies tie into like a good life lesson for the week, And so I really appreciate you being willing to share your story with us.
Yeah. Thank you for having me on. It was a pleasure.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks, brother. Appreciate you, and hope to see you next week.
All right.
If you like the story today, please don't hesitate to spread the love. Share it, like it, and subscribe to hear more. If you want to share a story from your life about an encounter with God, please don't hesitate to email me at jesse@newawakeningministries.org. Stay safe, and remember, the kingdom is among us.